The shipyards went dark in the same 24-hour window. Not destroyed, disabled. The difference mattered in ways the VOE Empire would spend months understanding. Admiral Harrow had spent 3 days selecting targets from a list of 11 major VOE military installations. He chose 4. Not the largest, not the most populated. The 4 whose damage would send a message without collapsing infrastructure that civilian populations depended on. Precision that required knowing exactly where to strike and exactly where not to. Grand Arbiter Solon received the Council's censor confirmation before her morning briefing. She read the report twice. Then she poured herself a cup of something warm and bitter that humans had introduced to the station's commissary 2 centuries ago, and she sat very still. 60 years she had held the center seat. 60 years of disputes between species that communicated in seismic waves and species that experienced time in the wrong direction. She had mediated conflicts that lasted decades. She had never read a report about a species that could strike an empire's home territory and chose to damage 4 shipyards instead of 11. She set the cup down. The liquid had gone cold. What happened next she watched from the center seat. You'll want to see it too. 30,000 years the conclave ring had stood. 30,000 years without a war declaration. The chamber was built for peace. Everything about it said peace. Curved walls of sound-absorbing material. Circular seating so no species sat higher than another. Air scented with something engineered to calm the nervous systems of 47 different biologies at once. It had worked for 30,000 years. Today, it was not working. Ambassador Yara Nolan sat in the human seat, positioned between the VTH Collective and the Muru Hive. The VTH communicated through color changes in their skin. The Muru spoke as a collective consciousness, their translated voice a single flat tone that somehow carried warmth. Yara had learned to stop looking at the VTH directly during sessions. The shades they turned when anxious were deeply unsettling to human eyes. Right now, both species were a very dark and concerning purple. Solon watched from her elevated center seat. All 6 of her eyes were open at the same time, which had not happened in the decades Yara had known her. Counselor VTH of the VOE Empire stood at the chamber's center. The VOE were tall with 4 arms and faces that had evolved to show no expression at all. Their skin was the color of old iron. They did not fidget. They did not blink often. They stood the way statues stood. They spoke the way stones fell. The VOE Empire, Counselor VTH said, formally and irrevocably declares the termination of the Galactic Accord with respect to the human collective known as Earth State and all territories under its administration. This declaration constitutes a state of war. The chamber was already silent. It became something deeper than silent. 47 species held whatever they had that served as breath. Yara Nolan looked up from the small tablet she had been reading under the desk. Solon noticed this. She had noticed Yara's reading habit months ago, the way the human ambassador's thumb moved across the screen in small practice strokes, the way she dog-eared digital pages. It was a novel. Yara was at page 312, a story about a woman who restored old buildings in a city that kept changing around her. Yara set the tablet down. She looked at Counselor VTH for a long moment. Then she looked around at the purple VTH Collective, the frozen Muru Hive, and Grand Arbiter Solon with all 6 eyes open. Then she looked back at Counselor VTH. Is there parking validation in this building? She asked. I have been here 4 hours. Nobody laughed. Nobody was in a laughing kind of mood, but something shifted in the room, some small confused pressure. Counselor VTH did not blink. The VOE Empire's terms, he said. I heard the terms, Yara said. She stood up. She was not a tall woman. Standing did not make her imposing. It just made her visible. I will need to transmit this to my government. Standard response time is 72 hours. The VOE Empire does not wait 72 hours. Standard protocol, Yara said. She picked up her tablet. It is in the Accord Charter, subsection 9, paragraph 4. I assume you have read it since you are terminating it. She walked out. The chamber stayed silent for a very long time after she left. Solon sat in her seat and thought about the parking validation question. She thought about it for the entire emergency session that followed, while the inner council debated what they knew about human military capability. She thought about it while the Kyra representative, ancient and gray-skinned, explained that humans were private about military matters, a historical pattern from their home world. They did not trust each other with that information, so they developed a habit of not sharing it. That seems counterproductive, Solon had said. It is perhaps, the Kyra agreed, but it is what they are used to. Solon thought about the parking validation while the Kyra added slowly that human conflict estimates were almost always wrong in both directions. They overestimated threats and responded with force that looked excessive. They underestimated threats and responded with what looked like passivity, which turned out not to be passivity at all. They are difficult to predict, the Kyra said. We have found it wiser not to try. Solon folded two of her hands together. She had been arbiter for 60 years. She had learned to be more worried by things she could not see than by things she could. She sent a message to the human embassy, marked personal and urgent. Yara's response came in 40 minutes. We appreciate the council's concern. We are handling it. Please do not worry. Solon read it 3 times. She had never received a message that said, please do not worry, in response to a war declaration. She decided, very worried. The Voe had chosen humanity for specific reasons. They had studied them for decades. This was not unusual. The Voe studied everything before they moved on it. Patience was one of the things they were best at. They lived for 400 years on average, which made them naturally inclined to long games. Humanity lived for about 90 years. Some made it to 100. A few pushed past that. 90 years, the Voe intelligence reports noted, was not enough time to develop strategic patience. Humans were reactive, emotional, short-sighted. Their history on their own planet was one long catastrophe interrupted by brief intervals of not catastrophe. They had fought each other constantly over land, resources, ideas, borders drawn on maps that kept changing because of all the fighting. They had developed weapons designed to kill each other in large numbers, then used those weapons, then felt bad about it, then built more. It was, by galactic standards, embarrassing. The Voe assessment concluded that humans were chaotic, emotionally driven and prone to panic under pressure. Their military history on Earth was impressive by primitive standards, but those were small wars, planetary wars, local wars. They had never fought a real war. They had never fought anything that was not themselves. They had been in the Galactic Council for 212 years. In that time, they had established 17 colony worlds, built a modest fleet, and made themselves generally pleasant to be around. They were good at trade negotiations. They made excellent food, which they were surprisingly willing to share. Several alien species had developed mild addictions to a human drink called coffee. They were not, by any measure the Voe could find, a serious military threat. The real target was not humanity at all. The real target was the Meridian Cluster, a region of space between Voe territory and the outer edge of human colonization. The cluster contained 3 star systems with mineral deposits the Voe had needed for 80 years. The Galactic Accord prevented them from taking it because 2 of the systems fell within humanity's registered zone. Remove humanity from the equation, and the cluster became accessible. It was, the Voe High Command had concluded, a simple problem with a simple solution. They expected the war to last 4 months. In the 72 hours after the declaration, Solon sent 6 separate diplomatic messages to the human embassy. She received 6 politely worded acknowledgments saying the human government was reviewing the situation and would respond in due course. She sent a 7th message directly to Yara Nalan. The response came in 20 minutes. We appreciate the Council's concern. The situation is under control. Please do not worry. The exact same words as before. Solon read them twice. She thought about 90 years. About a species that lived 90 years, that had spent 10,000 of those years fighting each other, that had stopped fighting approximately 300 years ago, and then 90 years later showed up in galactic society with good food and pleasant manners, and absolutely nothing visible to worry about. She thought about how in 60 years as Arbiter, she had learned to be more worried by things she could not see than by things she could. She called the Kyra representative. Kepler platforms, Solon said without introduction. Yes, the Kyra said, which told Solon that the Kyra had known about them or suspected them. How long have you known? We detected unusual construction activity in the Meridian cluster approximately 9 years ago. We flagged it internally. We did not report it to the full council because, the Kyra paused, because we were not certain, and because we did not want to raise questions that humanity had not offered to answer. You were afraid to ask. Another pause. We were cautious. Solon thought about that. What else do we not know about? We do not know what we do not know, the Kyra said, which was not helpful but was at least honest. What we do know is that humanity has a pattern. They share what they are comfortable sharing. They do not share what they are not comfortable sharing. And in 212 years of council membership, they have never made a threat they did not follow through on. They have not made many threats. No, the Kyra agreed. They have not. Yara Nolan sat in the human embassy on the council station and talked to Earth. There were 17 people in the holographic meeting. Some were military, some were diplomatic, some were neither, which meant they were the ones with real power. They had spent the first 40 hours going over the VOE Declaration in detail. Every clause, every legal reference, every historical precedent cited, and several that had not been. At hour 41, a woman named Minister Hale spoke. She was old and small and had eyes that looked like they had seen every mistake a person could make. They want the Meridian cluster, she said. That is what this is about. Everyone looked at her. Read the territorial maps. Remove us from the equation and they have a clear path to the cluster. The declaration is paperwork. The cluster is the point. Silence. Then we do not get removed from the equation, someone said. No, Minister Hale agreed. We do not. Another silence, longer. How long have we been building the Kepler platforms? 12 years of active construction, a military voice answered. The first generation is fully operational. The second is at 70%. And the VOE do not know about them. The VOE do not know about them. Minister Hale looked at Yara's face on the screen. When they hit us, and they will hit us probably within the week, let them come in. Let them see what they expect to see. Then show them what is actually there. Yara thought about page 312. She thought about the way Counselor VTH had stood in the center of the chamber like someone who had already decided how the story ended. I will let the council know we are handling it, she said. You already told them that. I will tell them again. The VOE fleet moved on the 4th day. They did not attack Earth. That would come later, after the colony worlds were taken and the human fleet was destroyed. They moved on Callaway Station first, a medium-sized human installation on the edge of the Meridian cluster. Population 40,000. Light military presence, a small garrison and 2 patrol ships. By every measure in the VOE intelligence report, it should have taken 6 hours. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Callaway system at 3 in the morning station time. What they found was exactly what the report said would be there. The station sat where it should have. The 2 patrol ships were where the report said they would be. The population scans matched perfectly. Everything matched. Commander Rix of the VOE Advanced Fleet ordered the standard approach. Weapons armed, shields at full, hailing channel open because the accord required a warning even in a declared war. 47 seconds to send the evacuation demand. Then, if no response, they would begin. The hailing channel opened. Callaway Station actual, a human voice said. Commander Rix, welcome to the Meridian cluster. We have been expecting you. Rix paused. In 11,000 years of VOE military history, no target had ever said they were expected. You have 47 seconds to begin evacuation, he said. Already done, the human voice replied. Has been for 3 days. The civilians are off the station. What you are looking at is a shell and a welcome mat. Rix looked at his sensor officer. The sensor officer looked back. The population reading still showed 40,000. Your sensors, the voice said, are reading a projected signal. It is a trick. An old one actually. We used to use it on each other. A pause. You should also know that in about 15 seconds, you are going to want to check your flanks. Rix checked his flanks. 15 seconds later, he understood two things at the same time. The first was that the Kepler platforms were real. The second was that 4 months was going to be a significant underestimate. The Kepler platforms were not in any VOE intelligence report, because the VOE had never seen anything like them. On sensor screens, they looked like ordinary space infrastructure. Long orbital structures, the kind every spacefaring species built. Communication relays, navigation beacons, fuel depots. The VOE fleet had scanned them during their approach and tagged them as non-threatening. They were not non-threatening. Each Kepler platform housed a rail acceleration system that humanity had spent 12 years perfecting in complete secrecy, built quietly in the gaps between their public military announcements, funded through budget lines labeled infrastructure development that the Galactic Council's observers had never looked at closely because humans built things constantly and with great enthusiasm. The projectiles they fired were not energy weapons. The galaxy had moved away from kinetic weapons 11,000 years ago. Energy weapons were cleaner, more precise, faster. Every species in the Council had energy weapons. Kinetic projectiles at the speeds the Kepler platforms could achieve hit like small moons. Rix got his fleet moving in the first 8 seconds. He lost 11 ships in the first 12. Not destroyed, disabled. The difference was important, and he would later understand it was deliberate. The Kepler rounds punched through shielding designed to stop energy attacks and had no particular answer for masses of metal moving at a meaningful fraction of the speed of light. Systems shorted out. Hulls cracked. Engines failed. Ships drifted. The VOE fleet scattered and regrouped at the far edge of the system. Rix counted his losses. 11 ships disabled, most likely repairable. No deaths. By some miracle of geometry, the rounds had struck drives and shield emitters, not crew compartments. He did not know if this was human precision or human luck. He did not know which answer was more unsettling. He sent a report back to VOE Command and requested instructions. While he waited, the human voice from Callaway Station came back on the channel. "Commander Rix, are you still there?" He took the channel. "I am. We do not want to destroy your fleet," the voice said. "We want you to go home. If you go home now, you take your ships with you. If you come back, we will have to have a different conversation. The VOE Empire does not retreat. That is a cultural value," the voice said. "We respect that. We have cultural values too. One of them is that we do not give up our territory." A pause. "We have tried. It does not work well for us." Rix closed the channel and waited for instructions. The instructions, when they came, were to hold position and wait for reinforcements. The High Command had not anticipated the Kepler platforms. They needed time to develop a response. He held position. 3 hours later, the 2 small human patrol ships, the ones that had been sitting exactly where the report said they would be, the ones he had dismissed entirely, moved to the edge of the VOE fleet position and stopped. "Just stopped," his tactical officer said. "What are they doing?" "I do not know," Rix said. "Are they threatening us?" Rix looked at the 2 small ships. By VOE standards, they were barely worth noticing. Their weapons, according to scans, could not threaten a full fleet. "I think," he said slowly, "they are watching us." He was right. They were watching and transmitting everything they saw back to Admiral Dex Harrow, who was sitting in a command center 17 light years away with a cup of coffee and a very calm expression. "They are staying put," one of his officers reported. "Good," Harrow set down his coffee. "Give them 48 hours. If they are still there, we move to Phase 2. And if they leave, then they have learned something." Harrow looked at the screen. "Either way, we are fine." The Galactic Council received Commander Rix's initial report before VOE Command did, because the Council had listening posts throughout the Meridian Cluster that the VOE had complained about for 60 years without success. Solon read the report in her private office and sat very still for a long time. Then she called the Kyra representative. "Kepler platforms," she said without introduction. "Yes," the Kyra said. "How long have you known?" We detected unusual construction activity approximately 9 years ago. We flagged it internally. We did not report it to the full council because—" the Kyra paused. "Because we were not certain, and because we did not want to raise questions that humanity had not offered to answer. You were afraid to ask." Another pause. "We were cautious." Solon thought about that. "What else do we not know about?" "We do not know what we do not know," the Kyra said, which was not helpful but was at least honest. "What we do know is that humanity has a pattern. They share what they are comfortable sharing. They do not share what they are not comfortable sharing. And in 212 years of council membership, they have never made a threat they did not follow through on. They have not made many threats." "No," the Kyra agreed, "they have not." Solon looked at the wall of her office. Outside, the station hummed with the usual activity of 47 civilizations managing each other. She thought about 90 years. About a species that lived 90 years, that had spent 10,000 of those years fighting each other, that had stopped fighting approximately 300 years ago, and then 90 years later showed up in galactic society with good food and pleasant manners, and absolutely nothing visible to worry about. She thought about how in 60 years as Arbiter, she had learned to be more worried by things she could not see than by things she could. She sent another message to the human embassy. Yara Nolan's response came in 20 minutes. "We appreciate the council's concern. The situation is under control. Please do not worry." The exact same words as before. Solon read them twice. She decided, very worried. The VOE reinforcement fleet arrived at the Callaway system on day 6. They were impressive. The High Command had taken the Kepler platform data seriously and assembled a fleet large enough to overwhelm the system through volume alone. The theory was simple. Even remarkable weapons had a limit to how many targets they could engage at the same time. The theory was not wrong, but it had several problems. The first problem was that the Kepler platforms were not the only thing in the system. In the 5 days since the first engagement, human ships had been moving quietly through the Meridian cluster. Not large ships. Nothing that would read as a military buildup on long-range scans. Small ships, fast ships, ships that looked like freight haulers and survey craft. Ships that had been moving through this region of space for years, doing exactly what they appeared to be doing, until 3 days ago when they had stopped appearing to do that and started doing something else. The VOE reinforcement fleet entered the system and immediately lost their long-range communications. Not jammed. The VOE knew what jamming felt like. This was different. The signals simply did not arrive anywhere. They sent and the sends completed and nothing reached its destination. What had happened was that the small ships had deployed a network of relay interceptors throughout the system. Human technology, old by galactic standards, repurposed in a way that nobody had thought to try, because it required a specific kind of thinking. The kind of thinking that comes from spending 10,000 years looking for ways to confuse and outmaneuver opponents who were often stronger than you. The reinforcement fleet was large. It was more than capable of handling the Kepler platforms if they could reach them. They could not reach them easily because every time they formed an approach pattern, something went wrong. Sensor data flickered. Navigation systems read incorrectly and had to be manually corrected. Ships in the fleet lost synchronization and broke formation. Nothing was firing at them. It was not an attack in any traditional sense. It was just constant low-level maddening interference that turned a 6-hour operation into a 3-day problem. By the end of day 3, the VOE fleet reached the Kepler platforms. They destroyed 4 of them out of 31. In the process, they lost 9 ships, not disabled this time. The platforms had been upgraded while the fleet struggled to reach them. The new rounds were smaller and faster, and the VOE shielding, adjusted to handle the first type of impact, had not been adjusted correctly for the new configuration. The VOE fleet pulled back to the edge of the system. Commander Rix, who had been there the entire time, watched the reinforcement fleet withdraw on his screens. The human voice came back on the channel. "Same offer as before," it said. "Go home, take your ships." The fleet commander's voice was flat and controlled in the way that voices became when they were choosing each word carefully. "What do you want?" A pause. "We want the Meridian Cluster to stay where it is," the human voice said. "We want our colony worlds left alone. We want you to go home and tell your high command that the math has changed. The Voe Empire does not negotiate from a position of defeat." "You are not defeated," the voice said. "You are being given the chance to understand something before it becomes more expensive. That is not defeat. That is education." The fleet commander closed the channel. He sent what report he could. His communications were still degraded. Back to Voe High Command. Then he went home. The Galactic Council session that followed was the largest emergency assembly in living memory. All 47 member species attended. Several had sent their heads of state instead of their standard ambassadors, which required the station staff to scramble for extra accommodations. The VTH Collective sent 9 representatives instead of the usual 3, which was apparently significant in ways the translation software could not fully explain. Yara Nolan sat in the human seat. She had finished her novel. Solon opened the session without ceremony. "The Voe Empire has suffered 2 military setbacks against the human Earth state in the Meridian Cluster. The Voe have withdrawn their forward fleet to home territory for strategic review. The Council is convening to discuss the implications and to assess what role, if any, the Council should play." A long murmur moved through the chamber. Counselor VTH stood. "The Voe Empire will handle its own military affairs. Council interference is neither requested nor welcome." "The Council is not concerned with Voe military affairs," Solon said. "The Council is concerned with the stability of the Accord. The Accord was terminated by the Voe Empire with respect to Earth state. That is their right under." She paused. "Yes, we have all read the charter." It was as close as she had come in 60 years to being rude in session. "What the Council is discussing is what happens next. What happens next is a matter between the Voe Empire and Earth state." Yara watched the chamber without changing her expression. The Kyra representative raised her speaking marker. "I would like to ask the human representative a question." Everyone looked at Yara. "Of course," Yara said. "We have seen over the past 6 days military capability from Earth state that was not reflected in any information the human government has shared with this council. Platform-based kinetic weapons of that scale. Communications disruption technology of that sophistication. These are not the weapons of a species that has been a peaceful member of this body for 200 years. Where did they come from?" The chamber went quiet. Yara considered the question. She looked at her hands for a moment, then looked up. "When humanity joined the Galactic Council," she said, "we submitted our history, all of it. You know what we were doing before we came here. We were building weapons. We were fighting each other. We were very good at it." She paused. "We did not stop knowing how to do those things just because we stopped doing them to each other. We just stopped pointing them inward." Silence. "The Kepler platforms were built because we have always historically prepared for the possibility that something would happen we were not ready for. It is a reflex. You cannot turn that kind of thing off after 10,000 years. You can only redirect it." She looked around the room. "We redirected it outward quietly. We were not trying to deceive the Council. We just did not advertise." The Kyra representative was quiet for a moment. "Is there more?" "Yes," Yara said. "No elaboration, no detail, just yes." The chamber sat with that. Voe High Command held its assessment. The numbers were not good. In 2 engagements, they had lost or seriously damaged 23 ships. They had destroyed 4 Kepler platforms out of 31. They had failed to take a single human colony world. They had achieved none of their operational objectives. The 4-month estimate was in a drawer somewhere. Nobody was looking at it. The assessment concluded 3 things. First, the Kepler platforms could not be approached through conventional means. They needed a new strategy. Second, the communications disruption technology was more sophisticated than anything in the Voe database. Understanding it would take months. Third, the human military structure was fundamentally different from what the reports had described. The reports had focused on visible assets. The visible assets, it was now clear, were not the point. Voe High Command debated options. One faction argued for withdrawal and negotiation. The Meridian Cluster was valuable but not at this cost. The majority faction argued for escalation, not against the cluster defenses, against the colony worlds, not military targets, civilian infrastructure, power systems, food distribution, communication networks, targeting that did not require getting past the Kepler platforms because it went around them entirely. It was, the majority faction noted, what humanity had done to itself for thousands of years. It was in their own historical record. Surely they would understand it as a tactic. The majority faction won the debate. The order went out. Admiral Dex Harrow received the intelligence on VOE fleet movements 6 hours before they moved. He sat in his command center with his coffee, which was cold, and looked at the projections on the screen. They are going for the colony worlds, his intelligence officer said. Civilian infrastructure specifically, not military targets. Harrow looked at the screen for a long time. Which worlds? Kepler 7, Meridian 3, and Callaway, Maine. They have identified the primary power networks and food distribution hubs. The model suggests they want to create supply crisis and force evacuation. How long do the populations have? If the attacks proceed as projected, 6 to 8 weeks before conditions become critical. Harrow put down his coffee. Evacuate all 3 worlds. Start now. Sir, the civilian disruption will be significant. Harrow agreed. Do it anyway, get everyone out. He paused, and then make sure those worlds are empty when the VOE arrive. He looked at the projection. 3 colony worlds, civilian infrastructure, the same logic that had driven wars on Earth for 10,000 years. Make life unlivable and the population would collapse. He had read that history. Everyone who worked in the human military had read that history thoroughly, because the foundational doctrine of human defense, written and rewritten since the last of the Earth wars, was built on one core principle. Never again let the ones making decisions be insulated from the cost of those decisions. Harrow looked at his intelligence officer. We make it clear that targeting civilians has a price, a specific, measurable, very direct price. His intelligence officer waited. Get me a list of VOE infrastructure targets, Harrow said. Military only. I want to know what they value that we can reach. The VOE struck all 3 colony worlds on the same day. They found them empty, not evacuated in a panicked rush, not the scattered, chaotic withdrawal their models had predicted based on human historical behavior during crisis. The populations were gone, organized, complete departure. 48 hours of clean, disciplined work and nobody left to threaten. The power networks and food distribution hubs were still running, but on automated systems with no one present to suffer. The VOE commanders stood over their sensor readings and understood that they had made a mistake. The human military response came in the same 24-hour window. Admiral Harrow had spent 3 days identifying targets. He chose carefully, military only, never civilian, never infrastructure that populations depended on, and he stayed inside that line without exception. But military targets could be large. Military targets could be meaningful. The VOE Empire had 11 major shipyards. Human forces hit 4 of them. Not destroyed, disabled. The difference was important and deliberate. Disabled meant the VOE could repair them over time if they chose to step back. Destroyed would have meant something different, would have said something different about humanity's intentions. Harrow wanted to send a message, not cause permanent damage. The message was, we can reach your core territory. We have been able to reach it for some time. We chose not to until now. The message was received. The Galactic Council received it too, because 4 VOE shipyards going dark was not a small event. The Council's sensor network registered the strikes within hours. Solon's message to the human embassy was different this time. It did not express concern. It asked a direct question. Ambassador Nalin, how long have human forces been capable of striking VOE home territory? Yara's response came in 11 minutes. For several years. We try not to lead with that kind of information at diplomatic events. It tends to change the energy of the room. Solon read that twice. Then she called the full council into emergency session for the second time in 2 weeks. The session was loud. Loud for the Galactic Council did not mean raised voices. It meant that 6 species were communicating at the same time in their own registers, chemical, vibrational, through color, and the translation systems were running at full capacity trying to keep up. The VOE representative was absent. Nobody addressed this directly. The debate was not primarily about the VOE anymore. The debate was about humanity, about what was already being called in the transcripts the revelation of capabilities. A polite phrase for the collective discovery that the pleasant, food-sharing, novel-reading species had been sitting in galactic society for 200 years, while quietly maintaining the ability to strike the home territory of any species within their flight range. The question being debated was whether this was a threat to the Council. The Kyra representative did not speak for the first hour. She sat and watched. Then she raised her speaking marker and waited until the chamber settled. "I would like to share something from the Kyra Historical Archive," she said. "Approximately 800 years ago, when humanity had just developed early faster-than-light travel but had not yet made contact with galactic society, the Kyra sent a survey mission to observe them at a distance. Standard practice. Non-contact observation. The chamber listened. The survey mission observed humanity for 7 years. Their final report concluded with an assessment that I have shared with no other species, because it seemed alarmist at the time, and because humanity subsequently proved to be exactly as cooperative as they appeared." The Kyra representative paused. The report stated that this species had spent 10,000 years learning to wage war on itself, that it was the most experienced military civilization we had ever observed, that it had never fought anything it did not eventually defeat, that it had never lost a war it chose to finish. The recommendation was careful engagement and no aggression under any circumstances. "Very quiet. We did not share this report," the Kyra said, "because humanity joined the Council 90 years later and was immediately and genuinely cooperative, and the report seemed no longer relevant." She let that sit for a moment. "I now believe it was always relevant. I also believe that humanity has been, since the moment they arrived, exactly what they claim to be. A species that wants peace and trades and talks and shares its food. And simultaneously, without contradiction, a species that has never stopped being what that survey report described." Yara Nalan was present as an observer. She had been asked to attend. She did not speak. VOE High Command held another meeting. The withdrawal faction was larger now. The 4 shipyards would take years to repair. The fleet losses were already significant. The colony worlds had been empty before the strikes, which meant human intelligence had penetrated their planning before it was carried out. The majority faction was smaller but present. It argued that withdrawal would permanently damage VOE's standing, that other species would read retreat as weakness, that the Empire had committed publicly and could not uncommit without consequence. The debate went on for 2 days. Then something happened that ended it. The VOE Emperor, who had not spoken publicly since the start of the conflict, called a full session of the High Command and spoke for 8 minutes. He said the intelligence reports had been wrong. He said the 4-month estimate had been wrong. He said the Empire had underestimated humanity in every significant way, and that continuing on the current path would result in damage that would take a generation to repair. He said one other thing which was not recorded in the official summary, but which several attendees later described privately to trusted colleagues. He said that he had obtained, through channels he did not specify, a full translation of the Kyra survey report from 800 years ago, and that reading it had clarified his thinking considerably. The decision was made to contact the human government directly, not through the Council, not through diplomats, directly. The message came to Admiral Harrow's command center at 2 in the morning. It was from the VOE Emperor's office. It was brief. The VOE Empire is prepared to discuss terms for the cessation of hostilities without preconditions at a neutral location of Earth states' choosing. Harrow read it once. He sent copies to Yara Nalan, to Minister Hale, and to 3 other people whose names were not publicly associated with the human government, but who were necessary for this kind of decision. Then he made himself a fresh cup of coffee and waited. Outside his window, a dozen human ships held quiet positions along the edge of Voe space. Still patient, still watching. Word moved through the galaxy faster than any ship. The Galactic Council had 47 member species, each with their own networks, their own information channels, their own analysts watching the situation in the Meridian cluster and sending reports home. Those reports were not classified. They were shared internally, discussed, evaluated, and occasionally leaked to species that were not members of the Council, but traded closely with those who were. By the time the Voe reached out to the human government, the broad outline of what had happened was known across a significant portion of inhabited space. A mid-sized species with a short lifespan and a cheerful attitude toward cooking had fought off 2 Voe military operations, evacuated 3 colony worlds in under 2 days, struck 4 Voe shipyards in home territory, and apparently done all of this with capabilities that nobody had known they possessed. The reactions varied. Some species, primarily the ones who had been on the Council longest and had studied human history carefully, were not particularly surprised. Concerned perhaps, thoughtful certainly, but not surprised. Others were shocked in the specific way you are shocked when something you thought was decorative turns out to be structural. And a small number were quietly frightened, not of what humanity had done. The targets had been chosen with clear restraint, military facilities only, no civilian harm. Operations stopped well before the point of permanent damage. The doctrine was clear and consistent. They were frightened of what humanity had not done. The Voe had struck civilian infrastructure. Humanity had chosen not to respond in kind. But the question that sat unspoken in a dozen council chambers and throne rooms and collective mind spaces across the galaxy was, could they have? The answer based on the available evidence appeared to be yes. And the follow-up question, why hadn't they, led to long conversations that nobody fully resolved. The Kyra representative visited the human embassy in person. This was unusual. The Kyra generally conducted their diplomacy through formal channels and scheduled sessions. Personal visits were rare, reserved for situations they considered significant enough to require directness. Yara Nalan received her in the embassy's small meeting room, which had a window that looked out at the station's interior ring and the ships moving through it. The Kyra representative sat across from her and was quiet for a moment in the way the Kyra were quiet, not empty, full of something being organized before it was spoken. I want to ask you something that is not a diplomatic question, the Kyra said. All right, Yara said. When the Voe targeted your colony infrastructure, the civilian power and food systems, what was your first response? Not the strategic response, the immediate one. Yara considered this. She was quiet for a moment in the human way, a briefer, more restless quiet than the chiropractist, but genuine. Anger, she said, and then very quickly recognition. Recognition of what? That this is what we used to do, Yara said, to each other. For thousands of years, you make life impossible and you wait for the population to break. She looked at the window. We know exactly how it works. We invented it multiple times independently. The Kyra representative was quiet again, and the decision not to respond in kind was not a difficult decision, Yara said. We decided a long time ago that we were done with that, not because it does not work. It works. We know it works. We are done with it because of what it costs, not just in lives, in what it makes you into if you keep doing it. She looked at the Kyra. We have a word for it in one of our older languages. It translates roughly as becoming the thing you were fighting. The Kyra representative sat with that for a while. The survey report, she said finally. The one from 800 years ago, we should have shared it. Maybe, Yara said, though I am not sure it would have changed much. People tend to understand what we are better after they have watched us operate than before. What the report missed, the Kyra said slowly, was the 300 years between your last internal war and your arrival here. Yes, what happened in those 300 years? Yara thought about how to answer that. There were history books, detailed records, entire academic fields dedicated to those 3 centuries. She could cite any of them. Instead, she said, We sat with what we had done. We looked at it. We counted the cost. And then we spent a long time deciding what kind of species we wanted to be when we went out into the wider world. She paused. We did not stop being what we were. We do not think you can do that. But we decided what we would do with it. The Kyra representative's color had shifted to something Yara did not have a precise read on. Something between sorrow and respect. She thought, though she was not certain those were the right words. I believe, the Kyra said, that most of the council will reach the same understanding in time. I think so too, Yara said. It just takes a while to process. And the ones who do not. We will be patient, Yara said. We are not always patient, but we can be when it matters. Back on Voe home territory, Commander Rix wrote his personal account of the Callaway engagement. He was not asked to write it. There was no official process for personal accounts in the Voe military, but he wrote it anyway, because he was a thorough person, and because something about the encounter had settled into him in a way that he could not leave unexamined. He wrote about the warning, about the way the human voice on the channel had not been afraid, had not been aggressive, he searched for the right word and settled on matter of fact, as if the situation were already resolved and they were simply waiting for him to understand it. He wrote about the 2 small patrol ships that had parked at the edge of his fleet and watched. The 2 ships that had not fired a single shot in either engagement, that had simply observed and transmitted, that had stayed at the edge of his formation with a particular stillness of something that is not afraid of what it is watching. He wrote about the mathematics, about how many of his ships they could have taken in that first engagement if they had chosen to destroy rather than disable, about how the strikes on the shipyards had been calibrated, precisely, deliberately calibrated to damage without destroying. He had gone back through the strike data 3 times. The precision required to hit shipyard systems specifically and not cause structural collapse was significant. It was not luck. It was a choice. He wrote, they showed us what they were capable of. They did not use all of it. I believe this was intentional. I believe the purpose was not to defeat us, but to show us clearly and without ambiguity what defeat would look like if they chose to deliver it. He paused over the next sentence for a long time before he wrote it. I believe we should not have started this war. I believe we were wrong about what we were looking at. He saved the account. He did not submit it anywhere. He put it in a personal file and went back to his duties. 3 months later, after the peace was settled and the terms were signed and people across the galaxy were processing what had happened, a junior intelligence analyst in the Voe military would find that account during a routine archive review and forward it up the chain. It would eventually reach the Emperor's personal reading list. The Emperor would read it. It would confirm something he had already concluded. But that was later. The neutral meeting location humanity chose was a small council station called Platform 9, specifically designed for sensitive negotiations. It had been used twice in 30,000 years. The station staff had needed to look up the protocols. Both delegations arrived within an hour of each other. The human team was 5 people. Yara Nalin, Admiral Harrow, Minister Hale, and 2 others whose roles were administrative. Small for a negotiation of this scale. The Voe team was 7, including the senior member of the Emperor's personal council. His title translated as First Voice of the Emperor, and Commander Rix, who had been present at Callaway from the beginning and was there apparently as a witness. Solon attended as a council observer, not to mediate. Humanity had declined mediation politely but clearly. She was there because this was historically significant and the record should be complete. Nobody objected to her presence. The 2 delegations had a brief meal before the formal session began, because the human team had brought food and had offered to share it. The Voe, after a moment of consideration, accepted. Nobody discussed the conflict during the meal. Several of the Voe tried the coffee. The reactions ranged from mild curiosity to visible enthusiasm. Commander Rix, who held his cup with both hands and was quiet throughout the meal, looked at Yara once and said, "This is very good." "Thank you," she said. "We can share the source." He nodded and said nothing else. Solon watched the 2 of them from across the table. She thought about the Kyra survey report. She thought about what the Kyra representative had said in the council session. A species that wants peace and trades and talks and shares its food. And simultaneously, without contradiction, a species that has never stopped being what that survey report described. She watched Commander Rix hold his cup carefully, like something he did not want to spill. She thought, this is what 300 years of sitting with it looks like. The formal session began after the meal. Minister Hale put a single document on the table. These are our terms, she said. Read them. Ask questions if you have them. We would like to resolve this today if possible. I have a long flight home. First voice of the Emperor took the document and read it. He read it slowly and carefully, the way the Voe did everything. His 4 hands were still. His face, which had evolved to show almost nothing, showed almost nothing. He turned each page with the same deliberate pace. Then he looked up. These terms do not include territorial concessions. No, Minister Hale said. They do not include reparations. No, they do not include formal acknowledgement of Voe defeat. No. First voice looked at the document again, as if the missing things might have appeared while he was asking about them. What do they include? 3 things, Minister Hale said. The Voe Empire returns to its pre-declaration borders and does not expand into the Meridian Cluster or any current human administrative zone. The Voe Empire funds the reconstruction of the 4 shipyards we disabled as a demonstration of good faith. She paused, and the Voe Emperor sends a written communication to the Galactic Council, acknowledging that the war declaration was a mistake. Silence. That is it, first voice said. That is it. He looked at the document again. You could ask for more. Yes, Minister Hale said. You have the military capability to demand significantly more. We know. Then why do you not? Minister Hale leaned back in her chair. She had the eyes of someone who had been thinking about this question for a long time, possibly her entire career. Because we do not want an empire, she said. We want our space left alone. We want to trade and negotiate and share food and have everyone go home at the end of the day. She looked at him steadily. We are not interested in conquest. We are interested in being left alone to do what we do. The war happened because your government did not believe that. The terms are structured to demonstrate that we meant it. First voice was quiet for a time. Commander Rix, sitting 2 seats down from first voice, was looking at the table. He had been looking at the table since the session began. He was not absent from the conversation. He was present in the specific way of someone who has already understood where it is going and is sitting inside that understanding. The Emperor will want an explanation, first voice said, for the military capability, the platforms, the disruption technology, the reach into home territory, why we did not know. Because we did not tell you, Yara said. We did not tell anyone, not because we were planning something, because we have learned over a very long time not to show what you have unless you have to. And now we know. And now you know. Does that concern you? A little, Yara said, which was the most honest thing anyone from the human side had said across 2 weeks of very honest conversations. It concerns us less than the alternative, which was letting you take the Meridian Cluster and then having to make this point against a stronger opponent in a worse position. First voice considered this for a long moment. And if we had not declared war, if we had simply continued to pressure through diplomatic channels, we would have continued to resist through diplomatic channels, Minister Hale said. The outcome would have been the same. You would not have gotten the cluster, but with less damage to both sides. You would have held the line indefinitely. Yes, even without the conflict proving your capability. The capability was always there, Minister Hale said, whether anyone knew about it or not. First voice set the document down. He looked at Commander Rix, who was still looking at the table. Then he looked back at Minister Hale. I will need to transmit these terms to the Emperor. Of course, Minister Hale said. Standard response time is 72 hours. She said it without any visible awareness of the echo. Yara caught Harrow's eye across the table. Harrow looked away quickly, at the window, at the stars outside. The Emperor's response came in 31 hours. It was yes on all 3 terms, with one addition. The Emperor requested a direct communication channel between the Voe Imperial Council and the human government, outside of the Galactic Council's formal infrastructure. Not for military purposes. For the kind of direct conversation that formal diplomacy made difficult. Minister Hale approved it in 14 minutes. The Galactic Council session that received the Voe Emperor's formal letter, the one acknowledging the war declaration as a mistake, was quiet in a way that was different from before. Before, the silence had been shock. The silence of watching something unexpected happen. This silence was the kind that comes from understanding something you had not understood before. 47 species in a room built for peace, each sitting with the same new information, each arranging it according to their own history and perspective and particular angle on the past 6 weeks. Solon read the letter into the record. Then she set it down. The 30,000-year peace, she said, is technically restored. The accord stands. The terms of cessation have been agreed to by both parties in the formal sense. We return to where we were. She looked out at the chamber. However, she said, we do not return to what we were. Because what we were included a shared understanding of the galactic balance of capability that has turned out to be incomplete. The Kyra representative sat with her hands folded. Her color a settled, considered gray. The human Earth state has been a member of this body for 212 years. In that time, they have been cooperative, transparent in their diplomatic dealings, and genuinely committed to the function of this council. They have also simultaneously maintained military capabilities that no member of this body was aware of. Solon paused. I believe we should discuss that openly. Yara Nalan was in her seat between the VTH Collective and the Muru Hive. The VTH Collective had returned to their usual blue-green. The Muru Hive were watching her in the way they watched things they were still deciding what to think about. I will answer questions, Yara said. As always. How much are you willing to share? Solon asked. I can share the categories. Specific operational details are classified the same as any member species. But yes, we can have that conversation. And will there be more capabilities we do not yet know about? Yara considered this carefully. Almost certainly, she said. We keep building. It is what we do. But I can tell you that in 212 years of membership, we have never used or threatened to use any capability against a council member or their interests. The Voe Empire ended the accord with us. That was the condition under which we acted. The chamber sat with that. What we can promise, Yara continued, is the same thing we have always promised. We are here. We are paying attention. We want this to work. She looked around the room at 47 species, at 400 centuries of accumulated civilization, at the oldest piece in living memory reconstituting itself around something it had not fully accounted for. We are not easy to make into enemies. We have tried very hard not to be enemies with anyone in this room, but if someone makes us into enemies... She stopped. She thought about the platforms, about the shipyards, about Commander Rix at the edge of the Callaway system, looking at something that was not in his reports. We have had a lot of practice. The chamber was quiet for a long time. It was the Muru Hive that broke the silence, through their translator, which rendered their collective voice as a single flat tone that somehow carried warmth. Practice at war, they said, or practice at stopping it. Yara looked at them for a moment. Both, she said. That is the honest answer, both. 6 weeks after the peace was settled, something changed in the pattern of council diplomacy. The Muru Hive requested a bilateral meeting with the human embassy, then the VTH Collective, then 4 other species in quick succession. None of them mentioned the war directly. The requests were for trade meetings, scientific exchanges, cultural programs, the routine business of galactic diplomacy. But the requests came with a different kind of energy, more direct, with less of the ceremonial delay that usually preceded this kind of outreach. Yara mentioned it to Minister Hale in one of their weekly calls. They are recalibrating, Hale said, looking at us differently, trying to understand where we fit in the picture now that the picture is more complete. Is that good or bad? It is just true, Hale said. Most of them will decide it is fine. A few will be uncertain for a while, that is normal. And the VOE, their emperor, requested a bilateral trade consultation last Thursday. A pause. Food and agricultural products. Yara was quiet for a moment. They want coffee. They want coffee, Hale confirmed. Apparently, it has been circulating through their diplomatic corps for 40 years, and there was never an official channel to import it. We should give it to them. Already approved. Along with a note from our agricultural ministry explaining optimal brewing temperatures for the VOE physiological profile. Did anyone on our side actually write that note? 2 retired xenobiologists and a very enthusiastic barista. Hale said it was thorough. Yara almost smiled. So that is how it ends. That is how the first part ends, Hale said. The declaration, the conflict, the terms, done. A pause. The rest of it, the part where the galaxy recalibrates its understanding of what we are, that takes longer. Decades probably, maybe more. Hale did not sound concerned. She sounded like someone who had been recalibrated herself at some point a long time ago, by something she had eventually understood correctly. But they will get there. They are intelligent species. They can process new information. Even the part about the platforms, the shipyards, the reach. Even that part, Hale said, because the information that comes with it is that we did not use it offensively. 200 years of evidence. She paused. That is not nothing. Solon sat in her office on the last day of the formal review period and wrote her summary for the historical record. She had been Grand Arbiter for 60 years. She had written dozens of summaries. This one was harder than most, not because she did not know what to say, but because she was not certain the language she had available was adequate. She wrote about the 30,000-year peace and what it had meant, about the Accord and the civilization it had built and the genuine achievement it represented, about the VOE Declaration and the 6 weeks that followed. Then she stopped and looked at what she had written and tried to say what she actually meant. What she meant was this. The piece had been built on a particular picture of the galaxy, a map that everyone more or less agreed on, and the map had turned out to have a gap in it, a large and significant gap. And filling that gap in had changed the picture considerably, not into something worse. That was what she kept returning to, writing and rewriting. The new picture was not more dangerous than the old one. It was more accurate, and the species at the center of it, the ones who had revealed the gap by being forced to step into it, had stepped back out again as soon as the immediate problem was resolved, and gone back to their food and their novels and their trade negotiations, and had sent coffee cultivation guides to the empire that had declared war on them. She wrote, the 30,000-year peace ended. A new understanding began. The distinction may prove in time to be less significant than it appeared. What humanity demonstrated was not a threat. It was a floor, a minimum guarantee of what stability in this part of the galaxy is built upon. We did not know the floor was there. We know it now. I believe this makes the structure sounder, not less safe. She paused. Then she added one more line. I also recommend that the Council's observers pay closer attention, going forward to budget lines labeled infrastructure development. Yara Nalin finished her next novel on a Tuesday. She had started it 3 weeks after the peace was settled, on a long transit between the Council station and Earth for a scheduled government briefing. The novel was not about war or politics or galactic history. It was about a woman who restored old buildings in a city that kept changing around her. She finished it on a Tuesday and set it down and looked out the window of her embassy office at the station and the stars and the ships moving between them, going where they were going, doing what they were doing, the ordinary, enormous business of 47 civilizations sharing the same sky. She thought about page 312, about the moment she had set the book down and stood up and walked out of the council chamber, and the way the silence had followed her out. She thought about Commander Rix holding his coffee cup with both hands and saying it was very good. She thought about the Kyra survey report, 800 years old, sitting in an archive until it was needed. About the 300 years of human history that the report had missed, the years of sitting with what they had done and deciding slowly, and with great difficulty what to do with what they were. She did not think these things with sadness or pride. She thought them the way you think about things that are simply true, that have always been true, that you carry with you, that shape the way you move through rooms and conversations and situations without anyone needing to be told. The galaxy was recalibrating. It would take time. That was fine. She picked up the next novel from her stack. She found page 1. She started reading. Outside the window, a VOE trade vessel moved through the station's docking ring. Its manifest on file with the Council's commercial registry listed its primary cargo as agricultural goods, specifically a large shipment of coffee beans roasted to a specification, developed in consultation with 2 retired xenobiologists and a barista in Nairobi. The 30,000-year piece was over. Something else had started. It smelled very good.